G'day guys, my name's Ben Hamilton. I'm from Australia. I'm from a place called Ballina, which is in New South Wales. I'm a recovering gambling addict. Um, I've spent the better part of a decade being addicted to poker machines, or pokies is what we call them over here in Australia. Gambling was pretty normalised for me. Like, I was predisposed. My parents gambled, their parents gambled, so it was normalised. I still remember, being the age 4 or 5 and watching my parents go to the club every weekend, and I could tell. I soon found that connection when they came home. If they were happy, I knew that they won, or if they were sad, which was most of the time, because most of the time you don't win when you gamble. I worked that out at a very young age, so as soon as I turned 18, I hit the ground running. I started gambling. To me, like, earlier on, it was more really most weekends, wherever I had any money left over, that would just go all to gambling, going out with my mates, all the stuff you do as a young man. But for me, it soon turned into something a little bit more insidious. It just took over my life, and I was in denial for many, many years. And the only really reason why I stuck around was to just keep gambling. Fast forward a few years, I met my now wife, Jasmine, and for the first 12 months, she kind of didn't say too much about the gambling because we were still sort of, working each other out. But after the first 12 months, she really put her foot down and really started to challenge my behaviour and what I was doing. And it was always well known within my close group of mates that I was, I had an issue with gambling, and gambling was, really affecting my life in a negative way. But I was the kind of person in my group where I kind of made light of it, and, I was kind of the larrikin and the guy that would get the party going. So people kind of just let it go because they'd rather have me there, a part of it all, even though it was really, hurting my life. I was the facilitator of the gambling in my group. So, as I said, my wife really started to start challenging me on the gambling, and it was pretty vicious. I was really fucked to her, to be honest. We've been together for nearly 7 years now, and I'm still trying to make up for what I put my wife through with my gambling. I don't know if I ever will be able to, but I'm going to try. But it just really, it's taken me to some dark places. I've had suicide attempts. I've had two suicide attempts, and thankfully I wasn't successful either time. The first time was, I should go back from 2015 up until my last bet, which is the 9th of December last year. That whole time in my life is a blur, because there's so much fucked up shit that happened to me because of my gambling that it's hard to sort of keep track of it all. I'll give you a few of the more notable ones that I do remember. I was in the army at the time. I was out with a group of friends, and we all had our partners there. We're having a great time. I dragged one of my mates out of the place we were in to go to another place that had poker machines, and we didn't get let into that place. And on the way back, I got king hit in the back of the head, and I got badly beaten by a group of guys. And from that whole thing, I was diagnosed with PTSD. And that basically ended my career in the army, because the job I was doing, I couldn't have those kind of mental health complications with the job I was doing in the army. So that whole experience was, I suppose, both a blessing and a curse, because from that moment I really started to really look at what I was doing with my gambling. And it took me I blamed those people for many years for costing me my career in the army, but in reality it wasn't them. They did the wrong thing. But if I wasn't gambling, like if I wasn't trying to gamble, that situation would have never happened. So I'm thankful that that did happen, because from that, I was able to get a lot of therapy and a lot of help. Um, and, you know, as I said, my last bet was the 9th of December 2019. And this is the longest I've ever gone without gambling. So that was kind of a catalyst for me. But with the PTSD, brought on a whole nother suite of issues, and that just exacerbated my gambling. It didn't mean that for me, I called myself a nomadic gambler. Like, I wouldn't gamble frequently by this point. I'd go weeks to months without gambling, but when I did it, it was very destructive. Um, my first suicide attempt was shortly after that incident, and you know, I was really, you know, struggling with the PTSD. I wasn't leaving my house, and you know, my wife thought it'd be a good idea to bring all my friends up, and we'd have a drink. It was Australia Day, and I just wasn't in the right headspace. And she was only trying to do what she thought, you know, would make me happy. And I ended up getting really drunk, and then that led to a big gambling episode, and I just lost the plot. Because when I gamble, I'd always drink when I gamble, and as all gambling addicts know, you think to going to gamble is what's going to make you feel better, and it does make you feel better while you're there. But the minute you leave, your problems are a million times worse. And coming out of that venue on that day, you know, I told my wife to get fucked. I told everyone I was with to get fucked, and you know, I lost all the money I had, and I was just in a really bad place. And I went home and I tore my house apart. I put holes through the wall. I just ripped everything to pieces. And then I got in my car, which I shouldn't have done because I was drunk, and I drove up to there's where I used to live in Toowoomba. There was a cliff, sort of a cliffside, and I sat there for a long time, and I was ready to drive over the cliff, and I sat there, and I didn't, for whatever reason. You know, I was really emotional, and I was really sitting there, and I just something changed, and I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I ended up driving myself to the police station. And I got help. So that was the first time I avoided suicide, and I didn't stop gambling after that, but I was really starting to think about what it was doing to me, and how much damage it was causing. So we moved from there once I left the army, and my wife fell pregnant, and I thought that was it. I've got something to live for now. I mean, it sounds shit, but you know, my wife's my best friend, and she's the most important thing to me on the planet besides my son. But I thought, this is it. I'm going to be a father. I need to make things right. But I still gambled. I still destroyed the trust that I had with my wife. I still made her pregnancy a misery with my gambling. Made my own life a misery. It was just a whirlwind, a toxic whirlwind that I just couldn't escape. We moved down south right before we had our little boy August, and we had our little boy, and there was a brief time once August was born. I mean, I gambled 1 week after he was born, which, you know, was a really bad move. But we had a few months there where it was just me, my wife, and my little boy, and we were on this coastal beach town that was a very tiny population. Like, I only had a couple of hundred people, and we had some family down there, but that's all. We didn't know anyone, and our life was perfect then. It's one of the first times where I didn't think about gambling, and I went a few months there without gambling, which was, at the time, was the longest I'd ever gone for, and it was just a beautiful time. Life was simple, and that then really started making me think, well, there is something for me after gambling. That I don't have to do this anymore. Unfortunately, the time when I did go back and gambled after that, you know, beautiful little window we had, I won a pretty substantial amount of money. And for whatever reason, I brought that money home. I should probably mention that when I gamble, I don't gamble to win money. I know you don't win money when you gamble. I gamble to spend time in front of the machine. I gamble to completely fuck my life up financially so I can walk out of the venue at rock bottom, you know, feeling terrible, but then starting that cycle again of chasing that feeling of gambling. It has nothing to do with money. I run my own business here. We run a pretty successful business as a tradesman, as a tiler. We make good money. it's not about, it's never been about money for me. Or it might have been the first 6 months when I turned 18. I thought that that's, you know, it was about money, but it was just about this toxic relationship I had with this machine that was, you know, was the most important thing to me, sitting in front of this machine and spending time with this machine. So yeah, for me, I'd always, whatever I won, whether it was $200, $2,000, $5,000, it didn't matter. I'd push it all back through before I left the venue. But for whatever, this time, I took the money and I left, and I came home and I was like, wow, look, this is what I did. And my wife obviously was devastated. And we decided to move back up, you know, to where we grew up, and the gambling just continued from there. And it was just this endless cycle of, you know, trying to stay away and really meaning it at the time that I'm not going to do it anymore. And then, you know, she would forgive me, and we tried to mend our relationship, and then I'd do it again. And I just didn't know what the fuck was happening. And that's when suicide really started to become my friend, or the idea of suicide. Like for years, you know, I would just, it would take me away from the thought of gambling, and then from the thought of letting my family down. I'd be driving on the highway and I'd see a truck coming towards me, and I go, if I pull over, I pull into his lane now, it'll be this, I can end it. And I had a plan to suicide up, you know, which I didn't act on, but I signed up for life insurance, and I read in the fine print that you need to go 12 months before you get covered for suicide. So I was like, okay, well, this is it. I'll ride this out. I'll do the best I can, cause as minimal damage as possible. Once that 12 marks hits, I'll go out on the highway and I'll drive into a truck. And again, like I said at the start, the whole time frame, those 4 years is just such a blur. Like it's like someone just pulled a chip out of my head, and I've just lost memory, and it's very fragmented, the dates, the times. But I did try really hard to move away from gambling. I had a very supportive wife. I had really supportive psychologists, psychiatrists. I tried medication. I tried hypnotherapy. I tried natural therapy. I tried fucking anything that you could try. I tried it, and nothing was working. In 2018, I finished a job pretty early, and I got paid cash, which was probably the worst thing that could have happened. And I went to a local RSL club on the way home. I won a substantial amount of money, drunk there all afternoon, couldn't lose. It was one of those days, one of those unique days where I just couldn't lose a cent. I just kept winning and winning and winning. And I drove to another venue, same thing, just kept winning. And then it was about 8 o'clock at night, and I was driving to a third venue, and it's like I was again behind the wheel, completely drunk. Terrible thing to do. One of the things I still am ashamed of to this day, the drink driving stuff I used to do. I just had like this epiphany, like this moment. I explained it to my psychologist, like my whole life is this sheet of glass, and it just completely shattered in an instant. And I just realized that I can't go home tonight because I keep winning. Again, it was never about the money for me. When I tried to take my life that night, I had like $5,000 in my wallet. It wasn't about money. It was just about time in front of the machine as fast as I could. And then I'd go home and I'd start again. But I couldn't start again because I still had money to spend. So I just accelerated and drove my car off this embankment into the back of someone's property. I didn't hurt myself. It was weird. And I even had another young man in the car who was going to be my apprentice. And, you know, I put his life in danger as well. And he was thankfully fine as well. But my car was completely written off. And from that moment there, from that moment in 2018, I just didn't know what to do anymore. Like I generally tried to end it, and it didn't work. And I remember the next day, like laying on the ground in the bedroom floor in the fetal position. I thought my life was gonna, leave me. because that was the most hectic thing that had happened to us, and no one knew at that point that it was a suicide attempt. My wife just thought I lost control of the car. But I remember my son crawling up to me because he was a baby. And his first word was dad, and he was like, dad, 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 and he crawled up to me, and I looked at my son, and I knew that I loved him, but I didn't feel anything for my son anymore, and it scared me like really badly. Like I still remember that feeling vividly, and I get emotional thinking about it because he looked at me, looking at him, and I could see that he felt he knew that I was not right. Like he knew that I wasn't there, and I just got up, gave Augie back to Jazz. I walked out into the kitchen. We were living with my mother-in-law at the time. She came into the kitchen, and I thought, okay, here we go. She's going to bite my head off because my mother-in-law is, a single mum with 6 kids and is a very independent woman, a very powerful woman. And she said to me, do you want a cup of tea? And I said, yeah, I'll have a cup of tea. And she's very blunt. She just said, you've got 2 options left. She goes, you either go and do it properly. She knew what I tried to do the night before. She knew straight away. She said, you either try and do it properly or you fight. And from that moment onwards, I chose to fight. I still gambled a few times after that suicide attempt in 2018. Thankfully, they weren't. They could have been a whole nother hugely destructive episode like the last, but they just didn't happen that way. So I think someone was really looking over me at that point as well. But my last bet was the 9th of December, and I had a big fight with my wife. I went and gambled. I booked a motel room. I still had money left. I still had about $800 left, and I just chose to get up and leave the venue. And I came home that night. I spoke to my wife the next day, and I said, I'm not going to gamble ever again. Obviously, she didn't believe me because I've said it a million times, but I just something changed. I said, I'm not going to gamble again. Then, from that moment, my wife and I decided that we need to do something different, and that's when we started our little thing called Kickin the Punt, and which basically is about helping other people who are struggling with their addiction, just communicating, people with lived experience, just talking to other people that are still struggling, and just really building those relationships. And we've had great success with that. And that Kickin the Punt is, really what's kept me away, because I get a daily reminder of, people that are still day one, where they're fucked up the night before, and they're raw, and they're at their rock bottom. And so we get those, we get hundreds of messages a week through our platforms, and we answer everyone, and I read every single message, and I talk to every single person, because I've always said that I'll always do that. And it's for a selfish reason. It's to keep me honest. It's to keep me honest. He keeps me honest too. and yeah, it's coming close now to a year where I've not gambled, and I've never not done that. I've never done that before. The longest I've gone was after that suicide attempt in 2018. I went 6 months. I thought I was never going to do it again, and then it happened again. And yeah, we're in a really good place. We're doing a lot of good work with Kickin the Punt, and I'm just thankful to be in the position I'm in now. My life's so much better without gambling. I still struggle with the whole suicide thing, and even though gambling was the most fucked up thing in my life, and it's now out of my life, but I still struggle. Like I had like 1 or 2 spots where if I was going to do it, I would go and do it. And, my wife and I, as I said, we're still trying to mend that trust that I destroyed in our marriage, and we're working on it, but it's still really hard. And, I work, 40 hours a week, and then I go home and I do 40 hours a week with Kickin the Punt, and then I've got to be a dad, and I've got to be a husband, and then, and hearing all the people that, struggle, and it does. It's, you know, it's it's a humbling experience, but it's also a very hard experience as well. And I even found myself, you know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I haven't shared this with anyone, but I even found myself at one of my spots just sitting there, and I sat there for a few hours, and it wasn't that I was going to be suicide, but it was just a place of me that it seems, you know, morbid, but I go there and I hear the wind go through the trees, and it just really just calms me down. And because the thing is with gambling is it takes over your whole life. And when you remove it from your life, it's like removing like one of your biggest, you know, toxic coping mechanisms out of your life. And so I don't have that now. And I use other things to try and fill that void. You know, it sounds fucked, but you know, even my own family, you know, my own wife, my own son wasn't able to motivate me to quit for good. It was a whole group of things that helped me make that decision. But I still find it hard because life still happens. Me and my wife still fight. We're both very stubborn individual people, and we still fight. But we love one another. But it's hard. You know, I get to a point where I'm at my critical mass, and I don't know. You know, I've started training again, and started to spend more time with my son, and you know, working with Kickin the Punt and all the other stuff we do is great, but still it's not enough to. I get to that point. I don't have any outlet because gambling. I could go in and drink, gamble really fast, and just let it all out. And yeah, it all came back in straight as soon as I walked out the doors. My problems multiplied, but I still could have let it out. And so now I'm trying to find ways where I can let it out that don't obviously, you know, not gambling, but it's still a work in progress. And the suicide thing, yeah, it's still a part of my life, and it's still something that I'm working on with my, you know, psychologist, and I'm now, you know, hopefully, you know, started studying counselling myself, because essentially with Kickin the Punt, I'm backyard counselling people through lived experience as it is. So I want to try and transition into that field eventually, and you know, help people and be able to support my family at the same time, because it's very hard to do what I do with Kickin the Punt and then try and support my family at the same time, not only financially but just as a father and as a husband. So I'm still trying to work out what's sustainable for me, and it's still a work in progress. But the main thing is my life is so much more beautiful without gambling in it, and I'll never gamble again. I'll just everything I've seen, stories. I now know I'm not alone. I now know there's millions of us, if not billions of us around the world that struggle with this. And yeah, it makes me feel good knowing that I'm not. And yeah, I'll keep going, and I'll keep trying to help people as much as I can.